This video is about the attention economy and what we can expect and some ways of using economic toolkits to think about attention as a commodity. And I just want to point out the two books that have probably most influenced my thinking on this are The Platform Revolution and Surveillance Capitalism. Alright, so we obviously know that platforms oftentimes compete for our attention and then they sell that attention to advertisers. This is just one model for platforms, and it's an important model. And economics is often described as a study of scarce resources. So we might ask ourselves, is our attention a scarce resource? And the answer is almost certainly yes. It's definitely not an infinitely supplied resource. There's only a certain number of people on this earth, and we only have a certain number of hours of attention per day to give people. But even though it's a scarce resource, it's not exactly a fixed scarce resource. So let me explain what I mean by that. At first blush, you might think that attention would be measured in minutes. For example, minutes on the platform or minutes that you're exposed to a certain advertisement. But it is not true that every minute is equal. So I would like to use the analogy of shelf space in a grocery store or a department store or whatnot. And companies will often talk about competing for shelf space. And sometimes they'll come up with a whole bunch of different variations, different flavors of chips, or different types of Coke, cherry, lime, Diet Coke, etc., for the primary purpose of increasing their shelf space. But not all shelf space is equal, right? Shelf space that's at the eye level of the customer walking through the grocery store is much better than shelf space at the bottom. So in addition to competing for shelf space in yards or feet on the shelf, you're also competing for the quality of the shelf space that you're placed at as a company. Now, if we think about time and time of our attention, we know that not every minute of the day is equal. And I first started thinking of this when I was thinking about my own productivity. So I have some hours of the day that I'm super on top of things, my brain's functioning really well. Other hours maybe I'm social, and some hours of the day I'm just tired and grumpy and I'm not equally productive. So even though the actual length of time for that period is the same, it really depends my mood, my mental state, the quality of every minute in my day in terms of applying it to whatever task I'm doing is going to be different. And it's not just high quality and low quality time in terms of my ability to interact with the world. There's different dimensions. So there's sort of how social I am, and I tend to be not social in the morning at all, but much more social in the evening, and I tend to be much more intellectually engaged in the morning and definitely less so in the afternoon. So the quality of our time has these dimensions of its usefulness. Now, let's think about that from the perspective of, say, advertisers. What kind of quality of time do they want? Do they want the hours of my time when I'm thinking really sharply? Is that what they're trying to get? Or are they trying to get the hours in the mid-afternoon when I'm tired and lazy and maybe a little bit grouchy? And if we're thinking about that, we might ask the question, what is the optimal type of attention that they want? And there's two different things here that I think are going to be really important when we think about optimizing the type of attention we're trying to get from people. So one type of attention that companies might value would be the type of attention that is associated with how easily we can be influenced, or how vulnerable we are to manipulation, or how much we have our guard down. So they've shown that when people are relaxed, they're more trusting, they're more susceptible to influence. If people are in a state where they're hyper-vigilant, they're less susceptible to influence. For influence, you want people relaxed, trusting, unquestioning. You don't want them on edge. You kind of want to lull them into a stupor where they're not thinking too critically, they're relaxed, and they're just open to influence. You can think of being hypnotized. What do hypnotists do? They get you really, really relaxed and trusting so that you're open to their suggestions. So that's a type of attention that might be of higher quality than just any old random hour of the day. Now, we could take this type of attention as exogenous. We could think of it as, oh, people have 4 hours in the day when they're kind of relaxed and in this influenceable mood. And then there's 5 hours of the day when they're hyper vigilant, and maybe a few more hours in between. So that's one way of thinking about it. But another way of thinking about it would be to figure out, can the platform increase the amount of time we spend in this state of stupor, this state of being zoned out? So if you can deliver content to people that will put them in that hypnotizable state, that's going to increase the quality of time that you can sell to your real customers if your real customers are advertisers. That type of attention is about influence on the mind. A second type of attention that might be really valuable to advertisers is the type of attention associated with the mood that is most likely to engage in action immediately. A mood when you're more likely to click, or a mood when you're more likely to sign a petition. And that's actually fairly different from the type of attention you need to influence a person's mind or way of thinking. The stupor type of attention might not be good at all for getting people to click, or getting people to sign up for an event, or getting people to make a phone call. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you've probably heard this from me before, but what gets us in the mood to click, what gets us in the mood for immediate reactive reaction, oftentimes that's going to be a sense of threat, or a sense of outrage, or sense of urgency. So it's kind of this hyped up state, and oftentimes it's negative, because negative emotions are much more powerful for influencing us than positive ones. Positive emotions are much slower to develop. All right, so I'd like to connect this with blockchain. So obviously there's going to be some problems here. If platforms have an incentive to guess and check on different types of content that will put us into different moods, we may get a combination of these two moods. We may get an expansion in the time in our day that we spend in this stupor, this sort of hypnotized state, where we're really relaxed and really influenceable. And on top of that, we may also get an expansion in the time of our day that we end up spending in a heightened state of threat, where we feel like we need to take immediate action, because that's also what the advertisers want. So if we think about social media as actually actively trying to change our mood and our state of mind into this more easily manipulated type of attention, so that every minute that platform can sell to advertisers has higher value, and you can put a higher price on that minute of attention, if that's the case, that's scary for society. So what does this have to do with blockchain? One of the big hopes for blockchain is that it will create a way of introducing more democracy into the way we run our space. Right now, the decisions made about how to manage platforms, how to set up algorithms, the level of transparency required with use of your data and use of algorithms, those decisions are all made by managers of companies who are beholden to shareholders. They are held accountable to profit maximization. To some degree, we need a power shift. We need a shift from the company and its objectives toward the users and the health of the population. Imagine if the users had a vote in terms of who put together policy for the space of the internet. Because the internet is now acting like space. It's acting like community spaces, like streets, like public squares. It's displacing some of the physical spaces we have in the world that we share as a community, that we vote on who manages those spaces. We need a way of democratizing the spaces that become large in our lives. And blockchain is going to offer some creative solutions for structuring the governance of such spaces. Because you may also need investment. You may need some profit maximizing features in there. You may need investors to invest in making certain parts of it better, but you also need a say in sort of the justice of the way that space is designed. And that's what blockchain brings to the table. I think it will be really important for the attention economy, and those are just some thoughts on the nature of attention.